Oh my God. Hare Krishna, welcome everyone. Welcome back, Kremlin. Long time no see. And Manjesh and Edgar, welcome back. Sri Nidhi, the ocean of Sri, or opulence. And of course, Bhakti and Carol is always with us. And I have a thought I want to begin speaking on. And that thought has impacted me in my life a lot, and it's really helped me. And I think it's a thought that can inspire us to overcome the difficulties we face in controlling the mind. And Prabhupada would often say that spiritual life is not easy. Arjuna says it's difficult to control the mind. We hear about constant endeavor. We hear about determination. And so sometimes we think, well, why is it so hard? Why does it have to be so hard? Why can't it be easier? And Prabhupada would get questions like that. Well, can't you make it any easier? And so, when you think about life in the material world, really, the only thing that's easy is failing. So if you don't try, then you could say, well, that's pretty easy. If you just want to live a mediocre life and just let everything flow and just let everything happen, that's pretty easy. If you're trying to do something, you're not really aspiring to be very successful at it or to do it well, that's pretty easy. You don't have to make much effort. I was once working on a CD. This was in 1989, and the technology we were using was still new, and we were running into many, many problems. Practically every few days, we were running into major problems. And part of the reason that we were running into these problems is that we wanted to do a really good job. And so one sannyasi was visiting, and we were telling him about this, and he said, Prabhupada said, if you want to do something first class, there's going to be a lot of problems or a lot of obstacles. If you want to do something last class, there really aren't any obstacles to doing something bad. It doesn't, it's like you don't care, then if there's an obstacle, you'll just go to sleep, or you'll just won't worry about it because you're not trying to perfect it. So if we operate under that paradigm or that belief that nothing should be difficult, then when something is difficult, then we question, well, why does it have to be difficult? And if it's difficult, then maybe it's not really worth doing. Or if it's difficult, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Well, that may be true to sometimes in some cases. But the point I'm making is generally that to achieve something great, it is difficult. Another time, Prabhupada said that in the material world there is anxiety, and even in the spiritual world there is anxiety, or in Krishna's service there is anxiety. So he said, if we're going to be in anxiety anyway, we might as well be in anxiety for Krishna. Of course, when Prabhupada was speaking of anxiety, he wasn't speaking of it in perhaps in the sense that we understand it, but in the sense of being anxious to achieve something and being willing to undergo whatever difficulties are necessary to achieve that. So he said that that's going to be true spiritually, and it's going to be true materially. So you see that if you want to achieve anything great in the material world, you're going to have to work at it. It's not going to come easy. And so similarly, just like Arjuna, when he's talking about the mind, he said it seems impossible to control. Or maybe not impossible, but almost impossible. And Krishna said, yeah, it is difficult. But then he said, by constant endeavor or constant practice. So the lesson that I learned that I wanted to tell you about was learned when I was preparing a course or a workshop on New Year's resolutions. And it also came up again when I was preparing a workshop on vows. And sometimes we think if we commit to something once, that's sufficient. Kind of gets the momentum going, and the momentum will stay. But it's not true. Because there are obstacles, it is always problematic if you commit initially, but you're not internally recommitting, like constantly recommitting. So in the Course on Vows, the way we understood this, particularly in relation to vows devotees make, to follow certain principles, chant a certain number of rounds, that you commit, even before initiation you commit, and then you officially commit at the time of initiation. But that's not sufficient. If I just commit at initiation and I don't continually recommit on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, however is necessary to keep that commitment strong, then we find for many devotees that commitment becomes weak and they can't follow. So it's the same thing with the mind. You say, well, controlling the mind. Well, I try to control my mind, but sometimes I can't. So Krishna says, yes, it's constant endeavor. So we have to do it constantly, all the time. It's not that, when you're on the stage of Baba, okay, it may be different because, or Ruchi, now you're attached to Krishna. So naturally you think of what you're attached to. But when you're not on that stage, still there are obstacles, and the obstacles will pull you away. So there's this constant effort that has to be made. Now, what happens for many of us is that sometimes we look at our past, we look at the things we've done, we look at the way we are, and we make some conclusions and say, well, this is the way I am. And those conclusions are thoughts. This is how we're thinking. Well, I am this way, and I've been this way, and I've done these things, and therefore we come to a conclusion about our present situation. Now that conclusion could be positive or it could be negative. In what I'm talking about now is the negative. So if we come to a negative conclusion based on past experience, that is something like driving a car by looking in the rear view mirror. And as you know, you don't drive a car by looking behind you, you drive a car by looking forward. So what we often do is we look behind us and we say, well, this is how I was, and therefore we come to the conclusion that this is how I am or I must be now. And sometimes when we do that, we may give up the fight to control the mind or discipline ourselves, control our senses, because we think by looking at the past that I am a certain way or have a certain nature, and therefore I am bound to act or think in a certain way. But we really do have control of our thoughts. Prabhupada says that, and he instructs us, and Shastra instructs us to control our thoughts. So that means we do have control of them. But before I get into that and discuss that a little further, I just want to go back to this idea so we see how the thoughts affect us. So now we're driving by looking at the rearview mirror, right? We're driving down the road and we're looking in the rearview mirror and we're trying to drive forward. Pretty dangerous, right? So in that situation, we're coming to certain conclusions about ourselves. And often we come to conclusions of lack, of inability, of certain types of conditioning that we believe are controlling us. Now, thoughts are very powerful because it's not difficult to convince ourselves that we have some lack or some difficulty. And the thought is so powerful that if we dwell on it, we become convinced, yeah, this is true. And as we become convinced, which doesn't take much, the mind begins to process that and react to the thought. And the thought that we put in the mind doesn't even have to be real. In other words, perhaps you are feeling you're worse off than you are, but because you're thinking you're a certain way or you have a certain handicap, the mind responds to that thought, which is kind of scary if you think about it. Of course, the flip side of that is if you have another thought, the opposite, positive, then the mind will respond to that. So I will tell you a story. It's kind of funny, but it's interesting and it illustrates this point. So there was a devotee. I don't know who his name is. I don't know where he lives. I don't know what he does. But someone told me the story. That he was out traveling on Sankirtan. And financially he was not doing well. And he was very much in anxiety about it. And his anxiety was stressing him out to such a degree that his wife had to do something to help him. And she knew if he had money, that stress would go away. He was in an abnormal state, and he needed to come back to a normal state. So she knew that he would be okay if he just had money. So she made up a story. And she called him up, and she said, "Honey, we just won the lottery." So here he is. He's out on the road, traveling, raising money for his family, probably in debt, probably not able to raise enough money, really stressed out, really in anxiety. So she makes up the story because she wants to relieve his anxiety. So that one thought, right, which was not true, but that one thought planted in his mind. What did it do? What do you think it did? How do you think he felt? Think he was happy? Think he was relieved of anxiety? Of course. I don't know how much she told him. Maybe she told him we made like $2-3 million. So even if you want to live on a high standard of life, if you have $2 or $3 million, you invest that, just some simple interest, whatever. And if you have 3 million, even at a small interest rate, you're doing well. You don't have to work. So she must have told him something like that, where there was like no anxiety about money. So that idea, that thought, which was not true, entered his mind, and it immediately changed his state, dissipated his ignorance, and you could imagine he became very happy and probably full of energy, because stress takes away your energy, it drains you. So one thought. So the power of one thought. It's very interesting. The one thought that I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not intelligent, will handicap you. The one thought, it may not be true, but just the thought, it has such power. So Srila Prabhupada has told us many times, we should control our thoughts. And I think it's important to understand the power of thoughts and how they affect our actions, how they affect our how we see ourselves, the thoughts we have about ourselves, how they affect what we will do and what we won't do. Sometimes we might tell ourselves, well, I could never do this, or I could never succeed on this level. That's a very powerful thought, because when you tell yourself that, then you don't endeavor to succeed. I could never really be a good devotee. I could never really chant japa well. I could never really be studious. I'm not a studious type. I could never really, go deeply into Shastra. I could never really do a lot of austerity. I could never control my mind. So these are very powerful thoughts, because the thoughts will, even if the thought is not true, you might think that about yourself. Perhaps no one else thinks that. Perhaps you're the only one. But because you think that, that thought becomes the guiding of where you'll go, or where, in this case, where you won't go, of how you will limit yourself. Now, something that I did a little study of in how Prabhupada dealt with his disciples. I didn't do the study. I believe a devotee sent me letters in which Prabhupada said, I have confidence in you. And I thought it was interesting that Prabhupada would say that. Now, we can look at it in a few ways, and one of the ways we can look at it is that if a devotee is sincere, then Krishna will give intelligence. So Prabhupada was seeing, well, here's a sincere devotee, and therefore he could say, I have confidence in you, knowing that Krishna would give intelligence. So that's true. And we can't doubt that that's one of the reasons Prabhupada said, I have confidence in you. But at the same time, I think there's another reason, in that Srila Prabhupada knew that if a person had confidence in themselves, they would be more productive, more energetic, happier, more determined. So he would say, I have confidence in you. That would build confidence in themselves. Confidence for them to perhaps go beyond their comfort zone, or do things try to do things they've never done before, which many young devotees did who were working under Prabhupada, because he would encourage them that you can do this, Krishna will help you, I have confidence in you, Krishna will give you intelligence, and so forth. So that planting of that seed, that I have confidence in you, it's such a powerful effect on the devotees. It's one thought, just one thought. So the power of thought is intense in how it affects us. What to speak of where it takes us in the next life. As you think it, so you become. So here, what does Prabhupada say? I would like to. Well, let me see if you're saying anything. What are you saying? So, okay, didn't say much. Did you? So far, nothing for me to respond to. So here Srila Prabhupada says, this is in the Bhagavad Gita, the 15th chapter, text 7, and this is in the purport. The first business of one trying to advance in spiritual life is to control the mind and senses. Okay, let me read another verse. That was not a verse, that was purport. I will read a verse from the Bhagavatam. This is the 3rd canto, 15th chapter, text 8. There is no defeat in this material world for persons who control the mind and senses by controlling the breathing process, and who are therefore experienced, mature mystics. That is because by such perfection in yoga they have attained your mercy. So let's read what Prabhupada says. The purpose of yogic performances is explained here. It is said that an experienced mystic attains full control of the senses and the mind by controlling the breathing process. Therefore, controlling the breathing process is not the ultimate aim of yoga. The real purpose of yogic performances is to control the mind and senses. Anyone who has such control is to be understood to be an experienced, mature, mystic yogi. Now listen carefully, more carefully. It is indicated herein that a yogi who has control over the mind and senses has the actual benediction of the Lord. And he has no fear. In other words, one cannot attain the mercy and benediction of the Supreme Lord until one is able to control the mind and senses. Wow! Should I read that again? Okay, I'll read it again, since you all said yes. In other words, one cannot attain the mercy and benediction of the Supreme Lord until one is able to control the mind and senses. So, to me, one of the things that means is, again, as I said earlier, constant commitment. And sometimes we don't want to control our mind and senses because it's hard. It's too much trouble. It takes too much energy. You know, it's kind of like sometimes you're exercising or you're working and you just hit a point where you just ran out of energy. You don't want to do anything more. Sometimes the mind is like that. It just doesn't want to be controlled. It just doesn't have the energy. And it's always helpful to remember that it's going to be a constant process of being vigilant. And that even if the mind doesn't want to be controlled, even if we don't feel like it, still, that's our job. That's the position we take. That's the role we've taken. So, I'll read on. This is actually possible when one fully engages in Krishna consciousness. A person whose senses and mind are always engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord has no possibility of engaging in material activities. The devotees of the Lord are not defeated anywhere in the universe. It is stated, Narayana Para Sarve. One who is Narayana Para, or a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is not afraid, excuse me, is not afraid anywhere. They once asked Prabhupada, I forgot the question they asked. Maybe one of you know. What is it like to be a pure devotee, or what is it like to be Krishna conscious? He said, not afraid. And that's amazing. Everybody, we're all afraid. You imagine, no fear. I mean, that's amazing. One who is Narayana Parayana, or devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is not afraid anywhere, whether he is sent to hell or promoted to heaven. So, the idea here is, of course, you take your mind wherever you go. So, you can go to hell with a Krishna conscious mind. So, this is significant. Here, the importance of controlling the mind is being mentioned as the way, as the means to get the benediction of the Supreme Lord. Then Krishna tells Yudhisthira, he said, nobody can conquer me who has not conquered their senses. So it's kind of, it's just, I think what it is sometimes we may not be dealing with the reality of what it means to be Krishna conscious. We may not want to face it head on, but that's what it means. And discipline, like our life, it's always a life of discipline. Of course, Prabhupada's saying here, by engaging in Krishna consciousness, then one will be controlled. At the same time, you have two things going on. You say you can't control your mind and senses without Krishna consciousness. And on the other hand, you're being told to control your mind and senses. If you don't control your mind and senses, how will you engage in Krishna service? If you don't engage in Krishna service, how will you control your mind and senses? So you say, well, what comes first? As I've said before, we make a vow at initiation to follow the regulative principles. We don't say, well, the Prabhupada said, he says, what are the principles? And you explain the principles, and you promise that you'll follow them. Prabhupada could have said, well, just promise to be engaged in devotional service. Fully engaged in devotional service, and then you won't have to take a promise to control your mind and senses. But he didn't do that. He said, no, you have to do both. And so it's really two rails of the railroad track, two tracks of the railroad. They work together. There's always going to be that effort. But as you become more Krishna conscious, then your senses are more controlled. So more of your effort is going into the perfection and the execution of bhakti. And less has to go into the actual effort to control your senses, because automatically, because of your taste for bhakti, your senses are being controlled. But the reality is, and we see this so often, is that at any point, until one is at least coming to the stage of ruchi, or close to it, the mind and senses can just go off. And so, therefore, we go back to that other point. We always have to be vigilant, because the mind and senses, you can't trust them. And it's always helpful to be realistic about it and be honest about it. I mean, sometimes it's hard to be honest and realistic, because perhaps you've gone for years and you're quite disciplined person and you're fairly controlled. So you might think, well, I've got this game down. I know how to play the game. I'm doing well and I'm winning. But it's dangerous. We should never think like that. We should always think, be vigilant, recommit. Every time you move, the camera shakes, and I don't know why. But the table must be, it's shake about 5 times already. So, okay. So, should I read something else? This is from Path of Perfection, which is a lecture on Bhagavad Gita by Srila Prabhupada. Here he says, in the Ashtanga Yoga system, so this must be Prabhupada lecturing on the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Ashta means 8 and Anga means limbs. So, what's popular today is one of the eightfold paths, which is asana. So there's yama, niyama, and there's asana and pratyahara, and there's pranayam, and there's dharana and dhyana samadhi. And there are different stages. So 8th chapter is talking about this Ashtanga Yoga system, or the meditative, the yogic process. In the Ashtanga Yoga system, these eightfold yogas, dhyana, dharana, etc., are meant to control the mind. So that's the whole point. So Krishna explicitly states that a man must utilize his mind to elevate himself. Unless one can control the mind, I'll read that again. Unless one can control the mind, there is no question of elevation. There it is, folks. You can't get around it. Unless one can control the mind. Now, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said the mind is very fickle, so it changes. It changes often throughout the day. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're not happy. Sometimes you're in a good mood, a bad mood, energetic, lethargic. Sometimes the nature of the mind is connected to the body. Obviously, when you're physically exhausted, your mind is also tends to be exhausted, and you can't focus, and you may just need to rest. But the mind, it behooves us to learn how to deal with the mind, how to reason with it, talk with it, get it in an optimal position where it can best serve us in our efforts to be Krishna conscious, where we can learn how to focus the mind and focus the thoughts in ways which are productive for our bhakti. And particularly that means when there are thoughts which are not helpful, how to learn how to transfer those thoughts or turn them around. So we're not draining all the energy out of the mind so that we can be in an optimal state. Otherwise, the mind is constantly going to be pulling us down, and all our energy is just going to get us back to zero. So we don't want to utilize all our energy just to come to zero. We want to utilize our energy to go forward in Krishna consciousness. So the mind has its tendencies, and people have their nature, and the nature comes out in the way they think. But a lot of the way we may naturally think may not be helpful. Some people are very critical. Some people are very jealous. Some people are very envious. Some people tend to be depressed. Some people tend to be very self-critical. Some people tend to not have a lot of confidence in themselves. It's just kind of their nature. Some people, like I was saying before, feel disempowered. They don't feel that they can change or do the things that they know, their intelligence knows, are proper, would be the best things for them to do. So if these are the kind of thoughts that sometimes plague us, then obviously it's important, well, I would say it's essential, to learn how to replace those thoughts with positive thoughts which are going to help us in our spiritual life so that we can focus on what we want. Now I was reading something, I don't know who wrote it, I think it was Bhaktivinoda Thakur, about the holy name, and he was saying, if you don't have an intention when you chant, you won't have attention. I thought that was interesting. If there's no intention, then there won't be any attention. So we know when we're chanting, we could say chanting haphazardly. It's without any intention. We're just kind of just chanting, not really focused on creating anything from our chanting. We're just chanting. And so it's much more difficult to be attentive to the holy name in that state. Whereas when you're in the intentive state, when you have an intention, I want Krishna's service, I want to be uplifted, I want to be purified, I want to do more service, I want to serve my Guru, I want to advance. If that's your intention, or there's so many intentions you may have when you chant, if that's any of those are your intentions, then naturally you'll be more attentive. So I think we can apply that same principle to the nature of the mind. If we don't have intentions or goals which are very explicit and clear, then it becomes that much more difficult to control the mind, because then You don't even know why exactly do I want to control it? What am I missing out on here by not controlling it? If you're in the mode of ignorance, you won't think like that. You won't think that you're missing out on anything. You think, well, actually, I'm enjoying by not controlling it. It's a lot easier. This is quite nice. It's like a perpetual vacation. I'm eternally relaxing here. I'm just letting the mind go wherever it wants. So as soon as you have an intention to achieve something, then you become aware of that. It becomes in the forefront of your mind. And that becomes the impetus to control the mind. It also becomes obvious that if you don't control the mind, you're not going to get there. So now you're clearly seeing that you're losing, what you're losing, and how you're losing. So being intentional in our spiritual life, what is it that we're trying to achieve on a day-to-day basis? What am I satisfied with my consciousness as it was today, as it was last week, as it was last month? Do I want to exist on that level? Or is there another state? What is that state I want to be in? How do I want to be? As soon as you begin thinking in terms of, well, what kind of Krishna consciousness do I want? How do I want to be? That is such an easier way to control the mind, because now the mind has something to focus on. Well, what would I like to be like? Well, I would like to be like this. I would like to do these things. So now you're giving the mind direction. Okay, so now how do we do that? What are the thoughts that I need now to achieve these things? And if I have negative thoughts, then it really becomes a disturbance, because now I can see that with these thoughts I'm not going to achieve my goals. Whereas if you don't really know where you're going, or you're not intent, or maybe you know where you're going, but you're not intent on getting there, it's going to be that much more difficult to control the mind, because the impetus will be less. There's less of a desire. If you don't care, then your mind's not going to care either. As soon as you care, then to the degree that you care, there'll be the tendency for the mind to start adjusting to how you care, with thoughts that support the goals that you care for. So then it becomes easier to control the mind. So as soon as you ever hear yourself saying, well, I don't really care, or it's too much trouble, then you know you're in trouble. Because now you're in a lower state, you're in a weakened state. So, as Prabhupada said often, why don't you shoot for the rhino? Shoot for something great. And the reason he said that is because when you shoot for something great, then it's a direction to strive for something. Whereas if you don't have anything great to strive for, you just you just do what you normally do, and you'll achieve what you normally achieve. Of course, if you're successful, it probably means that you're very fixed on achieving something, and you're passionate about it, and you're determined, and you're controlling your mind and senses in a way that you can achieve it. So I find it's very, very powerful meditation in Krishna consciousness to have very high aspirations. Of course, then some of you may say, well, you may have high aspirations which are beyond your qualifications. So I don't mean unrealistic aspirations, but aspirations to be a pure devotee, or at least aspirations to be in the next stage. What's the next stage for you? Whatever it is. How can I move forward? And then you'll start to see, or you'll naturally have the desire. So if I'm going to move forward, how do I have to think? Or how would a person on this level think? Just like, I don't know if you think this way, but if you ever associate with an advanced devotee, you can ask yourself, I wonder what his attitudes or her attitudes are. I wonder what he or she thinks about and how she looks at things. Because you can see they're more advanced than you are, and therefore they must be thinking, seeing, relating in a different way than you are. And what is that? How are they? So, by wanting to come to that level, then naturally you'll start to ask yourself, well, how will I have to think differently on that level to come to that level? And it's wonderful. And then when you realize that, you can start to think differently. And then if you think differently, the energy within you is going to be different. Your aspirations will be higher. Your determination will be stronger. Obviously, to overcome an obstacle takes a certain attitude. And if your attitude is, well, this obstacle is huge and I'll never overcome it, then there's no energy to overcome it. So then you ask yourself, well, how does a person who would overcome it think, or who has overcome it? How do they? And then you'll realize that they just looked at the obstacle and thought there must be a way around it. So let me think how to get around it. So now the mind is working in your favor. So, so what are you guys saying? Oh, Peaches. Peaches is in pink, and Peaches is with us. So Bhakti and Carol is saying, I noticed today about the power of thoughts. We're talking about something similar. A devotee was saying we shouldn't push for anything beyond our level of advancement. Yes and no. Well, in a sense, there's a saying, first deserve, then desire. But Prabhupada did give us this idea, shoot for the rhino. So I think the point is there's always a level just beyond where we're at, where we can take our next step, the next step up the stairway. And that in general, to aspire to be a pure devotee, to love Krishna, that has to be there. Now, if you're about aspiring for something particular, a particular state, very specific state, which is beyond your adhikari or your qualification, beyond your realization, yes, that would be, that would be like maybe you're 12 years old and you have the aspiration to be a nuclear physicist, so that's good. But to think that you're going to be one when you're 13 and get a PhD, no, you're not qualified yet. So you become qualified. So the general desire is fine, but the specific desire of what you will achieve when, that you have to qualify yourself for. So you balance it that way. If we only follow and ever feel that way ourselves, if we only do what we want to do, well, if you only do what you want to do, that's a whole other topic. Because there's a good part of what you want to do, and there's a bad part of what you want to do. And the good part is what your dharma is, and the bad part is what your senses want. So, but devotees get inspiration in the service of Krishna. And that inspiration often absorbs their mind. And a lot of times, when that inspiration isn't there, when we're not connected with the service that's inspiring, we just become depressed. I was just listening today, and this person was saying, if you find people who are depressed, and you ask them, well, what's your goal in life? He said, usually they don't have any. So, when you're connected with something inspiring that you want to do in Krishna's service, that's very powerful, because it will tend to absorb your mind in his service, and the service itself will give you energy. The service will purify you. So, the goal is to be engaged, and always thinking of Krishna, and be inspired in devotional service. So, Kremlin's saying he worked with depression. So now we can ask him, is that true? That depressed people have no real aim in life? Or they let's see what he says. Often they set higher standards that they could attain and felt unworthy. Yeah. That's good. So then that's an example of the power of a thought, that I would like to achieve this, but I can never do it. So then they don't try. Yeah, the mind is, I think particularly now in Kali Yuga, so one devotee is a doctor, he said half his patients are on what do they call them? Psychotropic drugs. I said, half your patients? I thought he was exaggerating. He was in, I think I told you this last week. He had a practice in Cincinnati, and he said, half my patients that come in are on psychotropic drugs. And I said, wow, that must be a really depressing city. He said, no, it's not. It's a nice city. I mean, you figure like, well, maybe in Alaska in the winter everyone's depressed because they don't see the sun, or in Sweden. But that was alarming figures. And life is depressing. So, if we're depressed and we're Krishna conscious, that means we're not Krishna conscious. Unless we have some clinical chemical imbalance, that's another thing. We're not really talking about that. So, psychotropics, antidepressants. So in regards to, let's say, people striving for something that's so high they can't achieve it and they feel worthless, it's, I think it goes back to Dharma, because when you're situated in your Dharma, what really is, what you're really meant to do, that generally becomes less of an issue. That issue is more like connected often with personality type, the perfectionist, or ego. Have to be the best, or kind of the self-talk. I can't stand to fail, so I won't try, because if I do, then I'll have to admit I'm not as great as I think I am. All thoughts which affect us, the power of a thought, a single thought. I think one of the things that Prabhupada really stressed for us in devotional service is if we're always engaged in service that is inspiring and satisfying, then the tendency is that the mind will be in a very positive state. And as long as the mind is in a positive state, then there's energy to go on in Krishna consciousness. There's energy to go on in anything. And when we may not be properly engaged, or we may not be properly situated in the right ashram, then all kinds of problems come. Or we have particular problems internally we're not recognizing, we're not dealing with it, and then all of a sudden we fall on our face. So, it's a whole process. It's not that you just chant Hare Krishna, but there has to be a foundation under you that's stable. Otherwise, you won't even be able to chant properly, because your mind will be so disturbed. It's not. We say, well, chant Hare Krishna, it will solve all the problems, but that's a qualified chanting. And if your life is so out of balance, if your mind is so disturbed, then you're chanting, but you're not hearing the holy name. You're not really chanting, because you're just dwelling within the negative, depressing thoughts of your own mind. So there has to be some groundwork, so foundation. And so for many people, they never found their dharma, their calling, what they should do. Even as devotees sometimes. We don't find it. And it can become very, very, how should I say, it can take away, it can zap our energy. And you find when a devotee is doing a service which is suited to his nature, and generally he's very energetic and very positive, and things tend not to bother him, and obstacles tend not to be significant in his mind. When you don't like what you're doing, it seems to be the opposite. That all the obstacles seem to be bigger. And there seems to be less and less energy. And so when you're not properly situated, there's all this negative energy, and it's just zapping your vitality. So let's see what's going on here. Talking about pharmaceuticals. And Kremlin says, yeah, go do gardening. back to the land, touch the earth. Yeah, go milk a cow. That's powerful. Go pet a cow, see a cow. This to be the cure for depression. You can take it to the clinic, bring some cows in, and have the people take care of cows. They'll all be elevated to goodness. Their depression will leave them. And then they're peaceful, and then they can chant. They should have cows in the jails. Let all the criminals take care of cows. I think I heard that they actually did that, and it worked. I think back in the years ago, there was this devotee named Hare Krishna Dasi, and I believe she wrote an article that they had done this experiment, and they had, I think, maybe it wasn't cows, maybe the inmates were doing gardening or farming, and it actually helped them a lot. So, I mean, the way we live certainly adds to the depressing circumstances of life in Kali Yuga, no doubt. But I think another factor, which we've talked about to some degree, is just in understanding how the mind works. It's important to create proper environment and proper association, because we know in certain environments we'll be dragged down. If our house is dirty, if there's clothes everywhere all over the floor, papers all over the desk, everything's just disorganized, then when you go in there, it zaps your energy. It's like, Vastu or Feng Shui. If you go in, if some Feng Shui expert goes into a room and it's totally disorganized, then that expert will say, this room is zapping your energy, you can't get work done here. So in understanding how powerful the mind is, how powerful thoughts are, then it's really important to create an environment which will be uplifting to the thoughts in our mind. So dirt is the mode of ignorance. Disorganization is the mode of ignorance. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but if you've ever been disorganized and you've ever reorganized your office or your room or your house, I'm pretty sure you felt much better. You felt kind of a cloud lifting from you, because that was the mode of ignorance, just going away. Of course, if you have 2, 3, 4 kids, sometimes it's hard to keep your house in order, especially if you have like 5. I've gone into those homes, and it looks like a thrift store that a bull just went through. And the mother said, this is about as clean as it gets. So, anyway, you get the point. Environment, what are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you watching? Who are you associating with? All these things are going to affect your mind. So then if you're seeing your mind is becoming negative, then you want to look, well, where's it coming from? What's the cause? And then what can I do about it? Because this is the real point of what Prabhupada's saying here, that you can do something. And so if you see there's a need to do something, don't just sit by and hope it happens, but actually take charge. Okay, I'm thinking in a certain way, I'm getting a certain result, and I don't want that result. I don't like it. So what are the thought processes and attitudes I need to have to get a different result? And then control those thoughts. So just like when we teach about japa, we teach certain attitudes that we should bring in to our chanting before we begin. Just bring in this certain consciousness attitude. So we have to consciously do that. The mind may not be where it needs to be before we begin chanting, so we bring it to the right point. So now I'm in the right frame of mind. So in order to succeed in bhakti, there's certain attitudes we have to have. Or, just like maybe you get up in the morning. It's not easy. But you have to have a certain attitude to get... Of course, everybody gets up in the morning. Get up early. If you don't get up in the morning, I feel sorry for you. But if you want to get up early in the morning, it's very difficult unless there's the attitude of this is the best time of day to be up, and this is the time of day I relish, and I want to be up, right? If it's, I have to get up, the alarm went off, I don't really want to get up. How are you going to get up? There's no impetus there. So you see how when you recognize what you want, then you have to go back and say, well, what are the thoughts that I need to have to get me there? How should I be thinking? When I hear the alarm, what should I be thinking? How should I be thinking when I go to sleep? I should be thinking, okay, this is what I want. I want it because it's important, because it's going to help me. This is what Prabhupada told us to do. This is the best time to be up. My rounds will be better. My life will be better. Everything will be better. Therefore, I can say, I really want to do this. This is a good thing. So now you have all these positive thoughts in your mind. You've used your intelligence. You've clarified it. So then you're fighting the negativity, the lethargy, the mode of ignorance, which is making it difficult for you to get up early. So it's not that difficult. But if you come to the point and say, well, I don't really feel like it, and I just don't feel like it, and that's the end of the story, then you don't come around to thinking, well, what can I do to feel like it? What are the right attitudes so I feel like it? Or even if I don't feel like it, what are the attitudes that will motivate me to do it? And then by doing it, I'll feel like it. So I think that's where a lot of times we come into a problem where we get into a certain train of thought and we think, well, that's just how it is. And here Prabhupada's saying, no, the whole point is control the mind. So control the mind means if the wrong thoughts are there, replace them with the right thoughts. Just like Patanjali, like we said many times, when Patanjali is saying, okay, if you have the wrong thought, just do a 180-degree turn and think the opposite. So it's the same principle. Where you think, if you're thinking the opposite, that means you're taking control. So what's being said is, okay, the mind, so many thoughts are going through the mind, thousands of thoughts every minute are going through the mind, but you want to bring in, if you're Krishna conscious, then they'll all be good thoughts. But until we're completely Krishna conscious, we, as needed, want to bring in the right thoughts when the wrong thoughts are there. Okay, so I have these wrong thoughts. These are wrong thoughts for whatever reason they may be, because this is the way I am, or this is what I did in my life, or this is what I did yesterday, or whatever. But I want to bring in the right thought. And what's the right thought? And then the more you do that, the more you'll see that you gain control of your mind, because you'll see that you can actually do that. You can actually, okay, that's the wrong way of thinking. I'm going to think this way. And then you'll see, hey, that actually worked. I could bring in a new thought, and I could move out this other thought. The best way to move out the old thought is bring in the new thought, bring in the more powerful thought. That's Patanjali's process. Bring in the positive. It's the light. So I know for a lot of devotees, the negative, they just kind of go with it, and they just think this is like status quo. It's just the way it is, and I can't do anything about it. So if we think like that, we're in big trouble. But the whole idea, this statement, control the mind, what does that mean? It means, okay, that may be status quo, but you can do something about it. Bring in a thought that will be like light to dispel the dark thought. Just practice it. Just practice doing it as much as you can. And don't expect your mind's always going to be thinking the right way. You think, well, I just chanted nice rounds. I read for 2 hours today. I'm set, ready to go. My mind's going to be in control. Maybe it will be, but not necessarily. You still always have to be vigilant. And if it's not, then you just start nudging it. It's getting off course. Nudge it back on course. Don't surrender to it. And then what happens? This is really bad. When it goes off, then when it gets really bad, it goes off, and then you convince yourself that's Krishna conscious. You can even develop a new philosophy and convince yourself that your mind off the mark is Krishna conscious. Then you're really in trouble, because now you can't do anything, because you don't even know it's off. And I've seen that happen to devotees. Kind of rationalize, justify. They want to think of themselves as Krishna conscious even when they're not. So what are you guys saying? Let's see. Talking about gardening and farming. What else? Dairy farm, gardening, okay. The conclusion of today's class is go plant a garden and milk a cow, and you'll be okay. Today I was tired, carrying heavy packages, had more than a mile yet to walk, so I thought, leave the past behind. I was stressing, thinking of the past day, and then I thought of the present. That was an opportunity for a nice walk, and right away I felt good. So it's a good example that you can always change your thoughts. Okay, what happened to the past you can't change, but you can change your thoughts now. So, Bhakti and Carol is always a good example of whatever I'm talking about. Thank you for that. And she wasn't tired, because often we become tired when we feel burdened. So she had a wonderful walk, and she chanted the whole time. And she was saying, today I was thinking of my problems. Well, how do you feel when you think about your problems? Well, if you're going to think about your problems, think about solutions to your problems. Don't just think about your problems, because that's not really going to help you, is it? But think about solutions. And as soon as you start, this is so nice, as soon as you start thinking about, if you think about your problems, okay. But if you start thinking about solutions to your problems, then your problems don't bother you, because now you're seeing a way out. And the solutions are positive. And don't ask questions which are negative. How did I get in this mess? No, how am I ever going to get out of this mess? No, how am I going to get out of this? No, you say it in a positive way. You don't say, why did I end up in this mess? You're saying, how am I going to get out? What am I going to do to get out? So as soon as you approach it positively, everything becomes easier. There's positive energy there. Okay. So Kremlin says, the Dalai Lama made a few statements about happiness or misery as a choice. Didn't I tell you that story that he said he was staying in the Swiss Alps in a penthouse? This is this really, really beautiful place. And then he was thinking, they're on the top of this mountain in the penthouse. And he was saying, a suicidal person will be in the penthouse and he won't be thinking, this is such a lovely place, such a beautiful view. He'll be thinking, this is a great place. This is the perfect place for me to jump out and kill myself. So that's the power of the mind. Everything that they say, everything's a choice, even not choosing is a choice. I think part of the problem is a lot of times we don't want to admit it, because then it requires hard work. It requires acknowledging that what's going on in our life is because of what we've thought in the past. What we've done is usually a product of what we thought. But the empowering part of it is if you realize you can change your thoughts, and that will change your actions, and that will change your results. So you don't have to continually get the same results if you don't like them, because you can change your thoughts. And hang around people who are thinking and acting the way you want to, and then you'll find out how they're thinking. Or you can ask them, well, how do you think about this? And then adopt those kinds of thoughts. So we have 2 minutes. Is there anything else you want to say or ask before we depart? So your homework is to implant all kinds of positive thoughts. There's a saying, if you don't like where you are, change who you are. So you could say, if you don't like where you are, change what you're thinking. It's quite simple, actually. I think it is simpler than we think. We think, well, just by changing my thoughts, are things going to happen? Well, if you're thinking improperly, the wrong things happen. So why wouldn't better things happen if you're thinking the right way? And then you say, well, what if I don't even believe it? It doesn't always matter if you believe it or not. Prabhupada encouraged us in so many ways. And, you could look at that encouragement and say, well, it wasn't true what he said. We weren't that Krishna conscious as he told us we were. But he said it, we believed it, and we acted on it. And we had a positive result because of his encouragement. So that's how we want to think. Okay, so everyone's going to go water their plants now. And put your hand in the dirt. Get back to nature. Actually, sometimes it's actually that easy. You just get into some sattva-guna environment and The mind just calms down. Sometimes you have to get out of the city and just see the country. The cities they're the mode of passion. Sometimes you just need to get out, and then you can get out, and then you can chant nicely. Prabhupada, when he was on the train in India, whenever they'd come out of the big city into the country, he would just say, "Oh, just see how nice it is." Because the cities in India, they're not nice. Millions of people are piled on top of one another. And it's overly crowded. So as soon as you get out of the crowded city, and there's the farms and land, you can breathe. It's so nice. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you next week, and Hare Krishna.